Today we're exploring, how about we call it a fascinating crossover of philosophy and faith. We're taking a look at Leibniz's own personal anthology, get this, of Maimonides' Guide for the Perplexed.
Wow.
Now, these are two big names, right? We've got Maimonides, 12th century Jewish philosopher, astronomer, physician, the guy who wrote the Guide for the Perplexed.
Right.
Then there's Leibniz, 17th century. This guy did it all. Philosophy, math, logic, you name it.
It really makes you think about how these two centuries apart were grappling with the same huge questions.
It really does.
And what's really cool about what we're looking at is that, Leibniz didn't just read Maimonides. He made his own little collection, picking out the parts that spoke to him, even adding his own thoughts.
Like we're looking over his shoulder.
It is, isn't it? Like a window into a conversation across time.
Total intellectual time machine. So what can we learn? What jumps out from this dialogue between these two?
Well, right away, you see how concerned they both were with how we even begin to understand God.
Yeah.
And they both seem to land on this idea of, negative attribute.
Negative attribute.
Sounds kind of strange maybe. But it's about saying what God is not rather than trying to say what God is.
So instead of trying to define God, which is always going to be limited by, us, we kind of acknowledge our own limitations.
Exactly. Maimonides says it so well. God exists, but not per existence, lives, but not per life, knows, but not per knowledge.
Whoa.
Like, it's a reminder that God's existence, God's life, knowledge, it's just on a whole other level.
We can't really wrap our heads around it.
Not even close. Like, any analogy just falls apart.
Trying to fit the ocean into a teacup, it just doesn't work. And I bet Leibniz, the logic guy, loved this approach.
Oh, absolutely. And you see this in how fascinated he was by the different names for God that Maimonides uses. Like the Tetragrammaton. Or the names with 12 letters, 42 letters.
So these weren't just names.
No.
Yeah.
They were trying to capture something real about God without limiting God, you know.
Walking a tightrope, it sounds like. Acknowledging that words can only go so far, but still trying to say something meaningful.
Right. And this leads into another huge theme, creation. And, the problem of evil. Maimonides believed the universe was created, which really resonated with Leibniz's whole principle of sufficient reason.
Which is?
It basically says that for anything to exist, there has to be a reason why it exists.
So the universe didn't just pop up out of thin air?
No way. There had to be a cause, a reason, and for them, that was God.
Okay, but then that leads to the question, if God's all-powerful and all good, why is there evil?
Oh, man. The age-old question.
Right. Philosophers have been going back and forth on that one forever. So how did these two approach it?
Well, they both shot down the idea that God directly created evil.
Okay.
And they pointed to this idea of privation, the idea that evil isn't really a thing. But it's more like the absence of good.
I think I get it. It's like darkness isn't a thing. It's just the absence of light.
Exactly. So evil is kind of like a void, a lack, rather than something God made.
Okay, I'm with you.
And get this, Maimonides just flat out says it is false that there are more evils than goods in the world. Now, gotta understand, he was arguing against this guy who basically thought life was a punishment.
Super negative.
Right. Like evil outweighs good, and that's just wrong.
So Maimonides is pushing back against this bleak worldview, and Leibniz, he had that idea of the preponderance of good, right?
Yes. The universe as a whole is good. They both believe that.
So even though bad stuff happens, it doesn't win in the end. That's kind of comforting, actually.
It is. And this brings us to something else really interesting. Free will and divine providence. Like, how do you square God knowing everything with us having real choices?
That's a head-scratcher. If God knows the future, how can I have free will?
Right. Well, Maimonides was firm on this. God knows the future, but doesn't make it happen. Our choices are real, even though God sees them coming, like watching a movie.
Okay, but I can still be surprised by a movie.
Exactly. You know what's going to happen, but it doesn't make the character's choices less meaningful.
So God's got the director's cut. But we're still the actors. What did Leibniz add to that?
Well, he had this idea of, get ready for it, future-free contingents.
Okay.
Basically, God knows all the possibilities, but doesn't choose for us. It's subtle, but it keeps both God's knowledge and our freedom intact.
So God sees the whole range of what we could do, but we're the ones who decide what we will do.
That's it.
I like that. Makes me feel less like a puppet. And they were both against predestination, right?
Told you. They believed in a God who actually wants us to participate, to make choices, even though God already knows what those choices will be.
It's a dynamic universe, then. God's knowledge and human freedom all mixed up together. And speaking of things that are hard to wrap your head around, miracles. Where'd they land on that?
Oh, Maimonides had such a cool take on this. Miracles, they aren't breaking the laws of nature. They're like rare events, totally unexpected, but still within what's possible in the universe. It's not that God hits pause on physics.
But the universe is just way more complex than we realize.
Yeah, so much more going on than we can even imagine.
Leaving room for the unexpected.
Totally. And challenging us to rethink what's even possible. But all this wasn't just, heady stuff for them. They believed these ideas had real practical effects on how we live.
Okay, now we're talking. How do we apply this to real life?
Yeah, right. Like, think about it. How could understanding this negative attributes idea change how we approach God? What about that principle of good outweighing evil? How does that help us when things are tough?
Or how do we believe in free will when we know God sees everything? These are big questions. It sounds like Maimonides had some ideas about how to deal with them.
You're right. He went deep on this, especially talking about Jewish law. And Leibniz was really into it.
Okay, now things are getting interesting. How did these two connect those big philosophical ideas to the everyday? So we've got these big ideas, these philosophies, and then we have actual guidance on how to live.
Yeah.
What did Maimonides say about that?
So he really went deep on Jewish law. And he had this fascinating way of breaking it down. So he talked about laws of faith, laws of how we should act, morally.
Yeah.
And then practical laws for everyday stuff.
Like a blueprint.
Yeah, a guide to being a good person through and through.
I like it. But how do those laws connect back to the philosophy stuff we talked about?
Well, that's where Maimonides makes this distinction between get ready, judgments, and decrees.
Judgments, decrees.
Yeah, so judgments, those are the laws that make sense, logically. Like don't steal, don't kill, things that, keep society functioning.
Right, we kind of get those instinctively.
They feel right to us.
Yeah.
But then you have the decrees. Those are the ones that might seem random or symbolic, like certain rituals or what you can and can't eat.
Okay, so some laws have a clear purpose and others not so much.
Not on the surface. But Maimonides said even those seemingly random decrees have a deeper meaning, even if we don't always get it.
Like what?
They're about growing, becoming better, cultivating virtues, bringing us closer to God.
It's like spiritual training.
Exactly. Think of it like working out. Some exercises might seem weird on their own, but they all work together to make you stronger, more flexible, whatever your goal is.
Okay, so we're not just robots following rules. We're doing these things to change ourselves on the inside. Did Leibniz buy this?
Totally. He loved how Maimonides emphasized this idea of eutaxia.
Eutaxia.
It means good order, harmony, but not just in society, in our souls too, even in our bodies. It's about becoming a whole person. Not just following rules, but transforming from the inside out.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And it's kind of like that Maimonides quote we talked about earlier.
You remember it?
Something about how loving God comes from understanding the whole universe and God's wisdom in it.
Yeah, exactly. It's saying we can't just love God with our hearts. We have to use our minds too. We have to try to understand the universe and how we fit into it.
So we got to be faithful, but also curious. Use both our heart and our head. It's a dance, kind of. Faith and reason.
A pretty important dance, I'd say.
Yeah.
Because it's how we connect to something bigger than ourselves, It's how we find meaning. And remember how Maimonides said we got to study logic, math, all that stuff before diving into the divine?
Like sharpening your tools before you start building?
Right. And Leibniz, he was the perfect example of that. A total Renaissance man. Brilliant in so many areas. They both saw knowledge as part of being spiritual.
Like understanding the world around us is a step toward understanding God.
Exactly. And that understanding should lead to action, right? Living a life that reflects the wisdom and compassion we find, both in the world and in our faith. And, Maimonides pointed out this difference between laws that are just about keeping society in order.
Keeping things running smoothly.
Right. And laws that are about perfecting our minds.
So some laws are practical.
Yeah.
And some are deeper.
And I think that's so relevant today, In a world where it feels like there are rules for everything, it makes us ask, what's the real purpose of this rule? Is it making me a better person?
It's about getting to the heart of it. But I'm also curious about how they handled the stuff in religious tradition that seems, kind of hard to square with logic.
Oh, yeah, totally. Think about the whole debate about the universe being eternal.
Right. Did it always exist, or was it created?
Big question back then. And Maimonides landed on creation, which fit perfectly with Leibniz's whole principle of sufficient reason.
They both said something had to cause the universe, right?
It couldn't just appear. And this led them to push back against the Mutakallim,
Who are they?
this group of Islamic thinkers who had some pretty wild ideas about God and how the universe worked.
So they are willing to go head-to-head, even with people who saw things completely differently.
Oh, yeah. And Maimonides, he just took apart their arguments piece by piece, pointed out all the inconsistencies, the flaws. It's like watching a master chess player.
And Leibniz is there in the margins, like cheering him on.
Totally. Finding connections to his own ideas.
Yeah.
It's like this intellectual sparring match across centuries. And one of the coolest things they argue about is this concept of accidents.
Accidents? Like car accident?
No. More like, events, qualities, things that happen to a substance. The Mutakallim thought accidents could exist on their own without a substance.
So like a smile without a face.
Yeah, exactly. And Maimonides and Leibniz were like, no way. Everything has to have a foundation, something it's attached to.
It goes back to that idea of a universe that makes sense.
Yes. A universe where everything's connected, everything has a purpose.
Even if it seems random, there's a reason. Like God's the conductor and it's all part of the symphony.
A beautiful image, isn't it? Even when life feels chaotic, there's this underlying order.
And knowing that, that's where we find meaning, right? It makes us want to dig deeper, ask those big questions, try to live a life that matters.
And Maimonides and Leibniz, they're like our guides. They tell us to be brave, be curious, but also be humble. But they also knew it's not all about logic. There's room for intuition, for symbols, for the things in our faith that speak to our heart more than our head.
Yeah, they weren't just cold, calculating machines. They were people of faith, too. And they knew that some things you can't just explain away. Didn't Maimonides get into some pretty mystical stuff?
Oh, yeah. He was into Jewish mysticism, and Leibniz ate it up. Like, remember how he interpreted the book of Job?
Vaguely. Wasn't it something about seeing the characters as different philosophies?
Yes. He was like, Job, that's Aristotle. Eliphaz, that's Jewish law. Bildad, that's the Mutakallim. Sofer, he's the Asherites, this Islamic school, all about God's power and predestination.
So he's taking this ancient story and turning it into a philosophical debate.
Exactly. He's showing how scripture can be read on different levels.
Yeah.
Literally and symbolically.
There's always more than meets the eye.
Right. And Leibniz loved it. He saw how Maimonides was using allegory, finding deeper meanings. It reminds us that we can be critical, we can ask questions, and that makes our faith stronger, not weaker.
So we're not just supposed to take things at face value. We can dig deeper.
And sometimes the deepest truths aren't in these complex arguments. They're in simple stories, like when Maimonides talks about Abraham and the Sabaeans.
The Sabaeans.
They were these ancient people who worshiped the stars. And he talks about how Abraham, who grew up believing that, rejected it. He came to believe in one God, beyond all that.
A real aha moment.
Yeah. It shows how powerful reason can be. It can challenge what we've always believed and lead us to something bigger. It's a journey, isn't it?
A journey we're all on, no matter what we believe. Trying to figure ourselves out, find the truth, explore these mysteries of faith and reason.
And Maimonides and Leibniz, they're right there with us, reminding us it's hard, but it's worth it. It brings us closer to God and closer to ourselves.
And it brings us back to that question, how do we actually live all this? How do we take these big ideas and make them real in our lives?
That's the million-dollar question. And that's what we're going to unpack in the last part of our dive. We'll look at how Maimonides' take on Jewish law, especially those decrees we talked about, can actually help us navigate life, align our actions with, divine wisdom.
Sounds good to me. Let's see what these guys have to teach us about living a good life. Okay, so far it's been big ideas, philosophy, all these arguments about God, creation, evil, free will. But, how do we actually live this stuff? How do we make it real?
That's where Maimonides gets down to earth,
Yeah.
with Jewish law. And remember, Leibniz was totally fascinated by this. Those laws we were talking about, the ones that seem kind of random, the decrees.
Right, rituals, things you're supposed to eat or not eat. It's not always obvious why.
But Maimonides said those decrees, even if we don't get the logic right away, they serve a real purpose.
Okay, so what is it?
He saw them as training, spiritual training. Like they help us build character, become better people.
So it's not just about following the rules. It's about what those rules do to us on the inside.
Exactly. Think about it like an athlete, right? They do all these drills, and some of them might look kind of weird if you don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I've seen some crazy stuff.
But those drills, they're targeted, right? They build specific muscles, skills, whatever the athlete needs.
So these decrees are like drills for our soul, getting us ready for the challenges of life.
That's it. And Leibniz, he picked up on this too. Remember that word eutaxia? Good order, harmony. It's not just about the world outside. It's about us inside.
Body and soul.
Becoming whole. And when we're whole, when we're in alignment like that, that's when we can really love God, like Maimonides said, wholeheartedly.
That quote, it was amazing, about understanding the whole universe, God's wisdom in everything.
It's saying our love for God can't be separate from how we see the world. We got to appreciate it, the wisdom in it, the beauty.
And those decrees, the spiritual practices, they help us do that. Like, they fine-tune our vision.
Totally. They train us to see the connections, the divine in everything. We start to see the world differently.
I like that. So our love for God grows as we understand more.
It's not blind faith, right? It's based on knowledge, on seeing how amazing creation is.
Awe-inspiring.
And that kind of love, it motivates us, right? It pushes us to live a life that matters, a life that reflects all that goodness.
It's been great exploring all this. I feel like I'm looking at faith, at reason, in a whole new way, how they actually work together.
And that's what Maimonides and Leibniz would want, you know? They wouldn't want us to just memorize their ideas. They'd want us to wrestle with them, question them, make them our own.
That's what I love about this show. It's not just about learning facts. It's about, like, sparking something in people, making them curious, helping them live better lives.
It's about becoming lifelong learners. Never stop asking questions, seeking truth, being amazed by the world.
Well said.